What's going on, my fellow football lovers? It's just me today. Caveman's on vacay, so I will be going solo. And it's really important that I get some information out. Because as most of you probably know, the NFL tampering period started on Monday. So there were countless moves that I am going to get into today. It started on Monday, and it's still going on. And if you refresh your phone, a new move just came through. So it's a lot of info to take in. That's what I'm here for. You don't have to look at any of that. I'll break down all the biggest moves that went down. And since it's just me, let's just get into it. And I'm going to go in kind of chronological order of the way they dropped. And the first big move was Chris Godwin going back to Tampa Bay, which is a humongous deal because he was easily one of the most productive players in the NFL last year before he got hurt. So to get him back on a hometown discount is a huge deal. It really is. It sounds like, according to reports, the Patriots offered him a king's ransom, and he ended up shaving off $20 million off of the total contract to stay home in Tampa Bay. So I don't think people are understanding really how big of a deal it is that he wanted to stay home and play with Baker and play with Mike Evans and play with his head coach, even though they have a new OC this year. So it's really exciting stuff for them. The next big one that kind of broke, one that everyone expected that almost felt too good to be true, was Drew Dahlman going to the Chicago Bears. And for those of you that don't know Drew Dahlman, he was probably the consensus number one center available in free agency. And for those of you that also don't know, the Chicago Bears have been going absolute apeshit in free agency regarding their guards. They just got Jonah Jackson, they just got Joe Tooney, and now they fill out their interior with the best center available. He's really athletic, he's really good in space, he's really good at run blocking, which is kind of everything that new head coach for the Chicago Bears, Ben Johnson, is probably going to take serious advantage of. So, good deal for them. The first one that I actually really hate is Javon Kinlaw, a defensive tackle, formerly from the San Francisco 49ers and the New York Jets. He's a former first-round pick who has played terribly every single year of his career and just got signed to a 3-year, $45 million contract to the Washington Commanders. This makes zero sense to me. I don't think he should be making $8 million a year. To make $345 is ridiculous. They cut Jonathan Allen to make room for him. That is not an improvement. And they already have Deron Payne, and they already have Johnny Newton, who they just drafted in the early second round last year. So I'm afraid I don't really understand that one, to be honest. One I do like, and the most underrated one so far, is Nickelback Jordan Lewis, formerly of the Dallas Cowboys, is moving on to Jacksonville, who kind of had a really crazy first day with James Gladstone, their new GM. He's 35, I think, and he looks like he's my age. This guy is a Madden player that is making Madden moves, and he's making good Madden moves. Jordan Lewis is probably one of the best nickels to play today. He's still pretty young, and to get him on a 3-year, $30 million contract is pretty impressive. One of my favorites, as a Cincinnati Bengals fan, to get B.J. Hill back is a pretty big deal. 3 years, $33 million, he stays home. This wasn't really seen as possible, to be honest. A lot of people thought that B.J. Hill was gone in inner Bengals circles. He's a very well-rounded player. He's not really great at any one thing besides being like a really good locker room presence. So, I'm a pretty big fan. I'm a pretty big fan of this. They still need a lot of work in terms of like interior pass rush, as B.J. Hill's, that's not really his game, and they don't really have anyone else like that on the roster. But I gotta say, I am a fan of getting him back. Like, the defense was terrible last year. Like, you have to upgrade. You can't lose one of your most solid players at the position. So, good to get him back. I'm really excited about that. And speaking of defensive tackles, I'm gonna rip into a few that kind of just happened. Milton Williams was kind of seen as the like consensus top defensive tackle in the class. Now he plays more of a 3-tech role, which for those of you that don't know, is kind of the opposite of a nose tackle, right? He doesn't really line up over the center. He kind of lines up usually kind of in between like the guard and the tackle in more of a defensive end / defensive tackle role. So he's more of a penetration style player than a gap control player. But man, he's a beast. He's really, really young, who was a rotational player in Philadelphia, but was a pretty pivotal reason why they won the Super Bowl. I mean, he was getting pressure left and right. He's not a fantastic run defender, but he's not being used in that way. You know, he mucks up the defense. He shoots the gaps. He's really athletic. He has a lot of pass rush moves, which is pretty impressive for a defensive tackle. Milton Williams signed with the New England Patriots, making $26 million a year. Now, he hasn't proven he's worth $26 million a year, but he's proven he might be. Like, he's proven that he can develop into this kind of player, which is a pretty big deal. Like, you want to get guys before they're great. You want to get guys before they hit their prime, so they're a little bit cheaper to you. I believe he was originally supposed to be an Arizona Cardinal, but he dropped out. No, my fault. He was supposed to be a Panther. He was supposed to be a Carolina Panther, and for some reason the deal fell through, and he signed with the Patriots. And that's a crazy move. I didn't think the Patriots were going to do something like that. They made a lot of big splashes, and Milton was the biggest one. He is the highest paid Patriot ever, which is crazy. A guy I've been pounding the table for since I've started, in the kind of the media of football is Poona Ford, who was a 5'11" nose tackle for the Chargers last year, which is a crazy thing to think about, but he is, in my opinion, one of the best run defenders in the entire NFL. He is a short but oddly athletic little nose tackle that you cannot move. And the Los Angeles Rams get him for a pretty reasonable deal, 3 years, $30 million. He replaces Bobby Brown, who was kind of their nose the last few years, and I really like Poona next to Kobe Turner, who is a really solid kind of penetration style, undersized defensive tackle who kind of lacks, the gap control, anchor type of play, and that's exactly what Poona Ford does. So that is a perfect bread and butter rotational lineup that Los Angeles has, which adds to an even better defensive front alongside Jared Verse and Byron Young. So I'm a really, really big fan of what they got going on. They have Braden Fisk, who's also a really nice, lanky, athletic penetration style player who is a bad run defender. So Poona Ford will perfectly even out this team. Speaking of veterans, this one I don't really know how to feel about it, and that is Darius Slay to the Pittsburgh Steelers on a fully guaranteed 1-year deal. Obviously, Darius Slay has always been a really, really good player, right? And he was good last year, but he wasn't their number one. They had Quinyon Mitchell shutting down the entire side of the football field, and Darius Slay, could kind of rotate in, do his thing, but there wasn't a lot of pressure on him, and he was also 33. He's a year older at 34, which is a big deal because corners do not play well at age 34. He is an outlier at this point, and you cannot expect this to keep continuing, going forward. And I normally would like Darius Slay for this kind of contract, but not for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a team that is trending in the wrong direction. They're making splashy moves, and they make these splashy moves every offseason, but they fail to find a plan for their future. They do all these things, and they fail to somehow find a good quarterback year in and year out. They think that they can just even out their roster, a good enough roster to make the playoffs, but it's not a good enough roster to elevate and win a Super Bowl, or even come close to making a Super Bowl. This team is not better than it was last year, and it's not looking good if they have to sign someone like Rodgers. So I really don't enjoy them signing a bunch of 30-something-year-old players. A 34-year-old corner was their first signing, and one of their only signings so far. I can't say I'm too impressed, to be honest, but I do really like the player. I think he'll have a good year. I just don't like this being where we allocate all of Pittsburgh's money, to be fully honest. But speaking of a former Steeler, and speaking of a quarterback for the Steelers, Justin Fields went to the New York Jets. And a lot of people, especially in Pittsburgh, wanted Fields back because he was the initial starter for the 2024 season, but he got benched for Russell Wilson. But the weird thing is that Justin Fields had a fantastic record. He was winning games. He wasn't turning the ball over. He was running the ball really well. And Pittsburgh ran the ball better when he was at quarterback because he has, that kind of dual threat style of play that opens up the run game for the rest of your team. I do think that 2 years, $40 million is pretty steep for a quarterback that hasn't really proven anything at this point, but he's proven he has potential, and I think that that's really important, and I think it does make sense to pay him that kind of money when he probably was by far the other best option available. This kind of gives New York a bit of an identity, if you will. New York recently has kind of failed to have an identity. They have a decent running back room. They had okay weapons, but you didn't really know what they wanted to do. They get a veteran quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. They like to throw the ball, but the pass blocking wasn't set up to do that. Now they're a running team. We know what they are. You have Justin Fields, you have Breece Hall, you have Braylon Allen, you have Isaiah Davis. Your offensive line's a little bit more manufactured to run the ball. You still have a decent weapon in Garrett Wilson. You can probably add another one in the draft. I like Justin Fields there. But it wasn't my favorite quarterback signing of the day, because that belongs to the Seahawks nabbing Sam Darnold for 3 years, $110 million, which sounds like a lot, right? It does. But Sam Darnold, please believe me, was by far the best and only option if you dream of making the playoffs available at quarterback. In the draft and in free agency, Sam Darnold was the only option if you didn't want to look stupid, to be honest. Sam Darnold just came off of a ridiculously productive year in Minnesota, and while I don't expect him to fully really return to that level of production, the Seahawks got a good deal. When you're paying $30-something million for one of the top quarterbacks production-wise in the NFL last year, that's a solid deal. You cannot get mad at that. So, full kudos to Seattle Seahawks for making something happen. They made mediocre lemonade out of some pretty shitty lemons. So I'm pretty cool with that. They lost Geno Smith, but after kind of recent reports of him wanting out after they offered him what they thought was a fair contract, they did what they could, right? You can only do what you can as a GM with what you got. And if Geno Smith doesn't want to be there, you move on, you get a third for him, and then you get a slightly worse quarterback. I'm okay with that. Any other big move from this time? Yes. Talanoa Hufanga was, 2 or 3 years removed from being a Pro Bowl level safety? I think he might have even been an All-Pro with the San Francisco 49ers. He is joining one of the already most dominant secondaries in the NFL in the Denver Broncos, which honestly is a really, really, really big deal. Because P.J. Locke was kind of their strong safety last year, and he was really the true vice that they had in their secondary. He was pretty bad. So to bring in a guy like Hufanga, who doesn't really have a lot of holes in his game and is better than P.J. Locke, that's a really big deal to add to one of the already best defenses and secondaries in the NFL. So to get him for what I think it was 3 years, 45, it's a little pricey for a guy that really can't stay healthy, but if he can, that's a really, really good deal, and their defense is terrifying. The next big move was, in a lot of people's minds, arguably the best edge rusher available in this free agency class, and that was Josh Sweat from the Philadelphia Eagles. He was kind of been seen as a above average edge rusher, a very traditional hand in the dirt defensive end. He can play from a wide 9, but you can also kind of move him inside. He's a bigger body. He went absolutely nuclear in the Super Bowl. He had 7 pressures and was clearly one of the reasons why the Chiefs were okay moving on from Joe Thuney and was by far one of the reasons why the Eagles were so dominant in the Super Bowl. So really, really good deal for the Arizona Cardinals to be the team that picks him up, because they were in seriously desperate need of anything pass rush related. You know, I'm a big fan of Dennis Gardeck. You can't rely on Dennis Gardeck to be your pressure guy. Arizona can now dip into the first round as well in the pass rush to pair with Josh Sweat and actually have like a really good duo/trio of pass rushers. So to get him for 4 years, 77, kudos. And almost in exactly same contract, 4 years, 77 million, the Packers sign offensive guard Aaron Banks from the San Francisco 49ers. Slightly puzzling, right? I totally get paying a lot of money to have a fully operational 5-man offensive line, but Aaron Banks is not that good, honestly. He's okay. But to pay 4 years, $77 million for an okay guard, and your plan is to move current offensive guard Elgton Jenkins to your center position, there's a lot of gambling there, right? You know, I don't think that the Packers' offensive line was their biggest issue. I think that they really needed pass rush. I would have liked to have seen some sort of allocation to try and trade for Trey Hendrickson, or to go after, you know, a top-tier pass rusher in this class. I think that they are really going to need corners. Jair Alexander is hardly ever available, and he also wants to be up for trade. So they lost Eric Stokes, who was a former corner for them, moved on to the Raiders. They have big needs. So to sign Aaron Banks, 4 years, $77 million, I can't get over that, man. That's a lot of money for him. So I'm going to have to pass. But I think it's a mediocre move. That's all I can say about that. It's a mediocre move. But a move that I am absolutely in love with and I cannot shut up about is Rams nose tackle Bobby Brown moving on to the Carolina Panthers. And as I said before, the Carolina Panthers thought that they had Milton Williams in the bag. Like, they were working on a contract and it slipped through. He went to the Patriots, so they scramble for the next best option. And they get a player that actually almost plays opposite of him. I talked before about Milton Williams being a 3-tech. Bobby Brown's a nose tackle. He is absolutely in his element. He is a long gap control run defender with, you know, decent athleticism, but he's not a Milton Williams. What he does is clog the middle and makes it hard for the offense to run the ball. So the Panthers are not only getting Derek Brown back, their Pro Bowl level defensive tackle, but they're also getting Bobby Brown in there, which is a really, really, really good duo. The Panthers also picked up Treshaun Wharton, who is a much smaller. He's about 6'1", 280 pounds, I believe, off the top of my head, who is more of a Milton Williams style, penetration style, undersized, 3-tech. So to have a well-rounded player in Derek Brown, a nose tackle in Bobby Brown, and a penetration style pass rusher in Wharton, the Panthers just went from one of the worst defensive tackle rooms in the NFL to, in my opinion, one of the best. So absolute kudos. I am extremely, extremely impressed with what the Carolina Panthers have done this offseason. Excuse me, I had to get that one out. We're going to move on to, in my opinion, the most puzzling thing I have heard so far. And that would be the Cleveland Browns trading Dorian Thompson-Robinson and a 5th-round pick to the Philadelphia Eagles for Kenny Pickett. What the hell? What the hell are the Cleveland Browns doing right now? They are in cap hell. They already have a bad starting quarterback in Deshaun Watson. They're letting Jameis Winston walk, who was like the only fun thing that ever happened in Cleveland the last 3 years. And then they go to Kenny Pickett, who has proven to be, simply put, just bad. He's just bad. He couldn't succeed in Pittsburgh with a better roster than Cleveland. He couldn't do anything in the brief moments he had as the Eagles quarterback. What do we think he's going to do on a Browns team that's rebuilding? whose offensive line is imploding as we speak, whose wide receiver 2 is Cedric Tillman, and doesn't have a running back currently. I am so confused about the plan of this Cleveland Browns team, and to trade capital for Kenny Pickett makes zero sense. I am upset for them. This is what it's called, like when someone says they're browning. Like the Cleveland Browns are browning right now. They're doing what the Cleveland Browns have done for the last 3 decades, and it's sad to watch happen again. Good Lord. Let's talk about a good one here. Let's talk about somebody breaking the mold. And that is the Indianapolis Colts finally, for the love of God, signing a good corner in Charvarius Ward. They got him for 3 years, 60, which does feel like a hefty contract for a veteran corner, right? $20 million. But I would say Charvarius Ward, if he's in his, if he comes back to his prime a little bit, is absolutely worth it. You know, there was a moment, last year, 2 years ago, where he was one of the best corners in the NFL. He is a long, physical perimeter corner that the Indianapolis Colts have been looking for forever. Jalen Jones, Juju Brents, they have been looking for this archetype of player for so long. And finally, someone kidnapped Chris Ballard, put him in a bag, and started signing good players. They also got Cameron Bynum, who will replace Julian Blackmon in their free safety spot. I am a really, really big fan of that one. He's basically a very similar player, just an upgrade in skill. And I think that both of these really fit new defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo's scheme. They play a lot of zone and, kind of a bend-don't-break style of defense. I think that if you play really physical on the perimeter, you find a lot of success in his defenses, and that's what Charvarius Ward does. So, absolute kudos to that man. Like that's a really good signing. Speaking of the Colts, they did sadly lose longtime center Ryan Kelly. He is one of the best centers in the NFL when he's healthy, and that when is a big if, because he is hardly ever healthy. But when in the last few years, but when Ryan Kelly is healthy, man, he's a great center. And he moves on to the Minnesota Vikings. They had Garrett Bradbury, and he wasn't the worst thing in the world. But when you have a rookie quarterback in J.J. McCarthy, who will likely be your starter next year, you need guys up front, and you can't have mediocre. So to get a guy like Ryan Kelly in there, a true veteran presence, is going to be a really, really big deal for that offense. So to pay him 2 years, $18 million. That's change for them. No problem. Really nice signing. So I'm just going to go into the other signings the Vikings made on day 2, because their GM Kwesi woke up, man, and he went berserk. So they made a pair of defensive tackle signings, Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave, they feel like the same signing, right? Like they're both guys that aren't amazing anymore, but they still got some juice. They're former Pro Bowl level D tackles. Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen, at one point, were both, in my opinion, top 10 defensive tackles at one point in their career. But not anymore. They are both terrible, terrible run defenders, but pretty solid pass rushers in their own right. They're both pretty athletic. They're both more penetration style players. They're both veterans. Like, if you know anything about a Brian Flores defense, they kind of fit exactly what that role is. It's a very penetration style, attacking downhill style of play that I think Hargrave and Allen will both do well for. I do believe that they were both pretty overpaid, but if you take a deeper look at how the contract is, constructed, they have outs, which means that if the players aren't playing to, their standard, the Vikings have a way of backing out of that contract with a pretty minimal penalty on their part. So I actually do really like these signings. And I saved the best Viking for last. Will Fries was seen as the consensus best guard available. Every team that I know that needed a guard, and even teams that didn't really even need a guard, they were all wanting Will Fries on their team, because what he showed last year in his pretty limited snaps was freaking all-pro level, man. And it's hard to pay a guy a lot of money from such a small sample size, but holy shit, man, he was freaking good. He was really good, run blocking especially, but he was a really clean pass blocker too. And a lot of people don't really know the name Will Fries unless you are pretty attentive to interior offensive line play. But the reason you might not is because he was pretty underscouted at Penn State. He was an offensive tackle there. And admittedly, his offensive tackle tape wasn't the best, but that's because he's a guard at heart, which kind of makes it hard to scout that. So when he moved to guard, developed in the NFL for a little bit, and then finally got his chance to play, he was out of this world. Next to Ryan Kelly, next to Quentin Nelson, he's the one that stood out. So really, really impressive on him. And another player that I'm a little bit more confused about is Darius Slayton, wide receiver of the New York Giants. Kind of had his pick of the litter, it felt like, right? Like it felt like he could go anywhere he wanted. Every team needs a field stretcher. Like every team needs a Darius Slayton on their roster. And he decided to stay home to like one of the only teams that doesn't really have a quarterback for next year. So I'm afraid I don't really understand. He made 3 years, 36. I feel like Buffalo could have offered him that. I feel like the Chargers could have offered him that. I was pretty confident he was going to one of those two teams, and he didn't go to either of them. So really weird of him to stay in New York, be their wide receiver 2 most likely, and just get paid a lot of money. But what's more upsetting about that is he made 3 years, 36, right? Which is basically the offer that they didn't want to offer Saquon. So they are cool paying a, pretty mediocre middle of the pack field stretching wide receiver, but they're completely unwilling to pay like comfortably the best running back in the National Football League. So God, man, I don't understand the New York Giants. I don't understand what they're doing this offseason. They've had a good few signings, but quarterback is the most important position, and as of right now, they don't have one, and it's not looking good. So, prayers for you guys, I guess. But Jesus Christ, let's move on to a team I actually do like. Sorry, not a team I do like, a player I do like. Najee Harris, former running back of the Pittsburgh Steelers, is the only running back to run for 4 consecutive 1,000-yard rushing seasons. He is constantly healthy. He can take a beating. And when he's not being hit in the backfield every play, he's shockingly effective. We saw, in my opinion, the best version of Najee Harris we've seen since his rookie year when Justin Fields was at quarterback. So imagine what's going to happen when he has Justin Herbert at quarterback, man. This is going to be really fun. Like, teams can't just, stack the box against the Chargers because you have Herbert and Ladd McConkey and hopefully a first-round receiver as well. So, damn, man, I'm excited for this one. A 1-year, $9 million contract, that's not much of a gamble. But it makes you wonder where J.K. Dobbins is going because he found a lot of success in that offense, too. Man, one that broke my heart is the San Francisco 49ers had to cut Kyle Juszczyk, who, in most people's opinion, has been the best fullback in the NFL for the last maybe decade. So to have to cut him because they're in cap hell, and then they sign goddamn Luke Farrell, who's just another blocking tight end for 3 years, $20 million. To put that in perspective, Mike Gesicki made 3 years, $25 million. Luke Farrell has never caught a touchdown in the NFL. What are you doing, John Lynch? I don't understand the thought process here of cutting a fullback like Juszczyk, who's basically a blocking tight end at this point. He's a really good receiver. And then they cut him and sign Luke Farrell for also a lot of money. I'm not with you here, man. Going back to the Vikings, another move I'm not as high on as most, and it almost feels pretty controversial. But Byron Murphy, their breakout corner, is re-signed for 3 years, $66 million. That's a lot of money, man. Unless you view Byron Murphy as a top 10 corner, that's not a good contract, and I absolutely do not. He had a lot of picks, right? He had I think 6 to 7 interceptions. That's really, really good. But that's not everything being a corner is about, and he actually gave up a ton of yards, gave up a ton of catches, And I think he mostly benefited from a really, really good pass rush that his defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, schemed together. You know, I'm not a believer that Byron Murphy himself was responsible for how good that how good his numbers actually were. And even if he was, 3 years, $66 million is kind of reserved for the like the Quinyon Mitchells of the world, the guys that shut down a full side of the football field, not guys that give and take, not guys that get picks but give up a ton of yards. So I got to say I'm out on that one. But two DB signings, kind of happened right after that. Well, and with a big range of outcomes. The big one, Javon Holland, was a former safety of the Miami Dolphins, moves on to the New York Giants. It might just be mean of me, but I kind of just don't like any player going to the Giants with the current state of their team right now. So it doesn't feel good to me, especially making three years, $47 million. I gotta say, I'm not in love with that, man. I like the player. I don't like what he's produced so far. I was a big fan of his coming out of Oregon, and I'm still a believer, but what he's produced the past, 2-3 years is not the best football. And it's not $47 million football, so I'm gonna really need to see development out of Javon Holland before I really get excited about this move. So that's not my favorite safety move of the day. My favorite was Andre Sisco, who was the free safety for the Jacksonville Jaguars that didn't have, the best PFF grades. He didn't have all that, but I just think that he was used incorrectly on an already terrible Jacksonville Jaguars defense. It's pretty hard to stand out as a safety when the rest of your team just sucks and you can't get pass rush and no one can stop the run. So everything's kind of on you as a safety, the last line of defense. So even among all that, he did show that he is a pretty good ball hawk. He has good ball skills. He has really nice instincts. And I think that he has, the frame and the skill set to become a better run defender. And for 1 year, $10 million, that's the perfect gamble to make. So good on them. Good on the New York Jets for picking him up. I'm really excited about that one, man. But one I don't know if I can get behind this one, man. Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones is becoming Indiana Jones. He is going to the Indianapolis Colts on a 1 year, $14 million contract. I mean, the only thing at this point that Daniel Jones is known for is being overpaid. And he kind of did that again. I'm not quite as disturbingly low on Daniel Jones as the rest of football fans seem to be. I do think that somewhere, some way, with a good football coach, there is a halfway decent quarterback in that guy, right? He has every tool to do it. He's a good character. It's just like he just hasn't tapped into it yet. And it's not going to happen in Indy either. He was just previously signed for like a month by the Vikings, who probably were his best chance to ever develop into that. Like we just saw them do it with Sam Darnold. We saw Kirk Cousins flourish with this scheme. And then Daniel Jones doesn't really try. He just goes to Indianapolis to compete for a starting role with Anthony Richardson for $14 million, and I think that their receivers are terrible. Not that they're bad individually, but as a unit, they had the highest drop percentage of any unit, and I don't like their offensive scheme. It's boring. It's predictable. I don't think that someone like Daniel Jones is going to flourish there. I think he'll probably be better than he was in New York because of Indy's offensive line upgrades and, a better run game, and they are better weapons, but that I don't like the signing for him. I like it for Indy. I don't like it for him. The funniest thing to happen so far, and the most confused I've been, was it basically felt like there was all momentum for Joey Bosa to sign with the San Francisco 49ers and play with his brother. They're both edge rushers. It was going to be, a brother duo. They're both pretty good football players. Nick's elite. Joey's up and down. And the 49ers felt this happening. They cut edge rusher Leonard Floyd, who kind of had a bit of a down year, but he's still a good player. And then later on in the night, it turns out that Joey Bosa is actually a Buffalo Bill for a 1-year, $12 million contract. And the San Francisco 49ers just cut Leonard Floyd for basically no reason. And now they are stuck with Nick Bosa and Yetur Gross-Matos. I mean, like, if that's how you pronounce it, I don't remember. But, like, they don't have an edge rusher anymore. Like, this is another position that they now have to attack early in the draft because they just cut Leonard Floyd. And what I'm assuming is anticipation of Joey Bosa's arrival because they cut him a literal 10 minutes after someone said that Joey Bosa was going to be a Niner. So weird thing to happen. I like the Bills to get Joey Bosa, though. I do think it's weird for the Bills because they now have 4 edge rushers that are kind of all built from the same cloth. You know, Greg Rousseau, AJ Epinesa. They just got Michael. I believe it's Michael Hecht. I don't know how to pronounce his name. And then they just got Joey Bosa, who are all kind of supersized, long run defenders that aren't overly nuanced pass rushers. So I'm kind of confused about the scheme fit when you have 4 guys that are all the same player to a degree. But, you know, it's never hurt anybody to have 4 good pass rushers. So I'll take it. In my opinion, the probably most underrated safety in the NFL is Justin Reed. You know, he has been one of the reasons why Kansas City has had such a good defense the last few years, man. He is a fantastic run defender, fantastic diagnoser, fantastic communicator. He is part of the reason why this team doesn't give up a lot of big plays and part of the reason why their run defense was so good. And he moves on to the New Orleans Saints for 3 years, $31 million. And I like that for New Orleans. It's felt like when you have someone like DeMario Davis and Cam Jordan, who are both, I'm pretty sure, on the north side of 30, they're kind of screwed, right? When you lose all your veterans. So to bring in a guy that is still considered a seasoned vet, but he still has good football left, I think this is really, really going to bring a new juice to their defense that they've been needing. One that almost felt too predictable that I couldn't even do it, but looking back, I wish I had predicted, was DeAndre Hopkins going to the Baltimore Ravens. Every year, it feels like the Baltimore Ravens sign some 34-year-old receiver that is like 5 years past their prime, and then they celebrate it like it's the best signing ever, and then the guy gets like 400 yards for the season. And it happened again with DeAndre Hopkins. You know, they just had Odell. They just went through Deontay Johnson. Like, they keep getting these guys and then celebrating how good of signings it is, and then realizing at some point that these guys are old and no one wanted them for a reason. The Ravens seem to get a new wide receiver every year, trying to fit between Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman, but I don't think D-Hop's the guy for that, honestly. He played okay in Tennessee, very up and down. Had a few games where he looked like vintage D-Hop, and then a few games where he was off the map. And then goes to KC, starts off with a bang. He had me fooled. I thought that they were going to win the Super Bowl because of how well he was playing. And then he was, running like 30 to 40% snap shares and was like buried behind Juju Smith-Schuster on the depth chart and barely even played. And then played in the Super Bowl and dropped like the biggest pass of the day. So D-Hop is not, his stock is not up. Baltimore's stock is feeling weird. And I can't say I'm in love with that. But to stay in the AFC North, and one that kind of has me thinking a little bit, the Pittsburgh Steelers signed Kenneth Gainwell to a 1-year deal. I like Kenneth Gainwell. I really, really do. He's a very talented backup running back, a really talented receiver, and it does make sense Pittsburgh would really want to sign him because he destroyed them last year, like single-handedly. But that was his best game. So I'm hoping that Pittsburgh's not too fooled by that, and they looked at the rest of his body of work and kind of understand a little bit more of who he is. But obviously, you want a guy like Gainwell on your team, and it's always a good signing to get him. But this makes me wonder if they're cool rolling with Jaylen Warren and Gainwell as their starting running backs, because for how questionable their passing game's going to be with an unknown quarterback, like, you would like to have a little bit more of a developed running back room than Jaylen Warren, who has never proven to be a high-volume running back. He's more of a change-of-pace guy. And then Kenneth Gainwell, who has always been and likely will always be a receiving, third down running back. So I'm a little frightened for Pittsburgh. It felt like they were going to get a second round running back, or they were going to invest in a guy like a J.K. Dobbins or a Nick Chubb, even, as like a seasoned vet that can carry, a lot of carries. And it seems like they're cool with this duo, because I don't view Gainwell as an RB3, and they're paying him a little bit more than an RB3 would be getting paid. So I'm curious about this one, man. Cooper Kupp was the talk of trades, and it seemed like a lot of teams were really interested in him. He's just a few years removed from being one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and he's been on the trade block for what feels like months, like since the new year. But the Rams just designated his release. So it kind of makes you question why they couldn't find a trade partner for him. I do understand his contract was absolutely ridiculous. Like I'm pretty sure he was due $29.7 million. I could be wrong, it's off the top of my head, but I believe $29.7 million cap hit this season for LA. So I get wanting to move on, but not being able to find a single trade partner. I mean, some of these teams have terrible receiving cores, and the receiving class isn't amazing in the draft. So a little weird. I do get them moving on to Devontae Adams, because that is an upgrade and it is cheaper. But it's crazy to see a guy like Kupp get released. Like it felt like he was a Ram forever. But that's the price of doing business, man. There's two more that I really want to get into, because it's two ones that I actually am really excited about. Evan Ingram. He visited the Denver Broncos and the Los Angeles Chargers, who were both two teams that I really, really liked him to go to. And he ended up picking the first team, the Denver Broncos. He is more of a, what do you want to call it, a jumbo slot, a mismatch type of player. He's not really much of an inline blocking tight end at 240 pounds and being 30 years old. That's not really who he is anymore, or really ever was. But he's a pretty good route runner. He's got good hands. He's still very athletic for a tight end. And in my opinion, was probably the best tight end available in this class, and one of the best available, even if you include the draft. So for the Denver Broncos and Sean Payton to kind of get their Joker type tight end, like that slot mismatch, the guy that you can't really cover with a linebacker in man coverage, and even a safety wouldn't want to attempt that. It's a really good signing for me. I mean, as long as they have a guy that they kind of designate to be their inline tight end, their blocker, and, just kind of run a lot of, 11.5 personnel, get Evan Ingram out there kind of as a tight end receiver hybrid. I love that. I mean, I haven't actually seen the contract. I don't think it's came out yet at the time that I filmed this. But if it's affordable, I love this. As long as it's like within the realm of what Mike Gesicki got paid, I really like this. And then the last one, really the only juicy one to happen in the last few hours as of nighttime on Wednesday, is Rico Dowdle, who had, in my opinion, one of the quietest 1,000-yard rushing seasons I've ever seen, and pretty efficiently so, in Dallas. But no one cared about Dallas last year, so no one really watched. But he's going to Carolina, presumably to be their RB2 in the wake of Jonathan Brooks' season-ending injury. So you have Chuba Hubbard, who blew up last year, and Rico Dowdle, who blew up last year. I love this Carolina team. I can't speak enough about how many good moves they made in this offseason. I mean, those are my guys. Those are the guys that, I felt a little bit more excited about than others. They were the kind of guys that, I really got excited about. So let me check my phone really quick, just to make sure we didn't miss anything while I filmed this. It looks like we should be good to go. Actually, the Vikings re-signed Harrison Smith. 1 year, $10.25 million. Jeez, man. I mean, I do get this, because they just lost out on Cameron Bynum, who was like a really, really promising safety for them. And also, Cam Jordan just re-signed with the Saints. Very interesting. Or at least I don't know if re-signed is the word, but it says that he is returning. So either he is not retiring or he is re-signing. I don't know what his contract was supposed to be. Either way, you get two, very loyal veterans to their team or coming back to their team this year. Harrison Smith, I'm a little bit more excited about than Cam Jordan. I think it's time for them to move on from his style of play, but really good stuff. There was a ton of guys that I didn't get into that I was a fan of. Robert Spillane being one. There's a Landon Roberts being one. There's a few guys I didn't really have the time for that I might make another video and get a little bit more in depth on the underrated signings of the week. But for now, this is what I got. Let me know anything else that I might have missed. Let me know, your most exciting signings of the week. And I'll probably be back by myself here soon, and I'm just going to recap the rest of the week. There's a lot more football to be had, a lot more signings, probably a few more trades coming up. So please stay tuned. You don't have to do any research. I will do it all for you. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you next time.